Thank you very much, Chris, and I want to thank everyone who has who's joined us today, as well as those who are listening offline. My name is Chandler Stevens. I'm the Vice President of the Cloud Practice at iCore Technologies, and I'm going to be joined by my colleague Jeff Loria, where we want to really have a conversation across a couple of different areas regarding cybersecurity. We first want to talk through how it really does affect everyone, and really, as Chris mentioned, this is probably of our four-part series, this is probably one of the most important discussions to have around security. And just with the recent news of breaches and cybersecurity issues, it really is important that everyone have thought and focus and responsibility around this topic. So what we want to do today is really kind of take you through a scenario. We want to talk through how a phishing attack, which Jeff is going to jump on here momentarily and talk a little bit more about, how that can really turn into a much larger problem. We're also going to walk you through the types of breaches and give you some information around what is going on in the industry, what are industry leaders doing about security, and how does this really impact us, not only at a global level, but also at a local level, and most importantly, what can we do? So I'd like to introduce Jeff Loria, and let's just kind of start talking through some of these topics, Jeff. So thank you for the time today. From your perspective, I mean, as I said, I think this is one of the more important discussions to have. I'm sure in your focus at iCore Technologies, this is one of those topics that I would imagine we've had with each and every one of our customers.
Yes, thank you very much, Chandler, for that introduction. Security, cybersecurity, IT security, and IT governance really is the foundation for IT services. And it is so important, as Chris indicated, 3 billion records are just acknowledged at Yahoo today. It has impact beyond that of just losing information. It has business impact, it has personal impact, company reputation. So what I like to do is take a minute and walk through an actual attack that took place, the results, and the process. So we're used to seeing these emails that come into our mailbox, these phishing emails asking for information, right? You know, please provide me with your username and password, you know, please update records. But here's one that came in, which was very interesting, came from Apple, looks like it came from Apple, had the user's name that I've kind of blurred out here, came in. Now, one of the things that we've all been trained to do is look at where it's coming from. And if you look at the highlighted area here, we see no reply at Apple ID, and then a long string of information. In this particular case, this didn't come from Apple. It actually came from a mail account, just mail, not from Apple itself. However, looking at the email, looks pretty official. Right? So a lot of times, end users will click on that Update Now. So as they click on the Update Now button, it brings us to a website that really looks like Apple's website. It is one of the nicest reproductions of a website that I've seen. It has all the elements that Apple uses, you know, manage your account, Apple ID, password, remember me, everything Apple, spelling is correct, context is correct. So a lot of times these phishing attacks, you know, their spelling is inaccurate, they're dramatically incorrect, but this is a one-for-one replica. Even if you notice the top left-hand corner, they're actually using an SSL certificate. One of the things that we've always trained our users is when you go to a secure website, right, look for the indication that says secure and HTTPS. If that is good, if that's there, then this is perfect, right? So in this particular case, it has a secure SSL certificate. So the user going there says, well, this is secure, so I'm in good shape. Now, what happens is once we put our Apple ID in, right, we're going to put in our username and password. It brings us to a second screen. Right off the bat, the moment you've entered that username and password, they've now captured some information about you. Most users do one fatal flaw. They use the same password across all online applications. And in a lot of cases, they also use the same email address. And in a percentage of those cases, it's a business email address. So we'll talk a little bit about what we should be doing or not doing. It asks for personal information, such as your name, typical information. They would ask your name, date of birth, a bunch of information, address. It does ask something that's very interesting. It asks for a social security number. So we fill out this form. The second part of the form asks for some additional information. For example, such as, hey, what's your mother's maiden name, your dog, your first car. So it asks all this information, which in itself is typical if you go to Apple and sign up for a service, and it has a finish button. Once we click the finish button, this particular phishing attack brings us right back to Apple's actual site. So this is now Apple's actual site, no longer the phishing site, so it is an Apple site. We can actually now put in a username and password here, the one that we've used. We'll log in and everything seems normal. So at this point, the attacker has compromised your username and password. They're going to at least hold on to this for a minimum 30 days, at minimum, until you get an invoice or until something happens. Now, with this harvested information, we now see the actual attack. A couple of things here. This is a log file from Office 365 email. And I want to point out a couple of things. This attack can happen on-premise and in the cloud. The cloud is more secure in services than an on-premise installation. I'm just using this as an example. In this particular log file, we'll see that we have a user logging in, right, from outside the country, and it's happened repetitively. From Nigeria, it's happened repetitively. We've captured that information. So from those stolen credentials, a person is now logged into the end user's mailbox. And here becomes a challenge. In most cases, what will happen, one of two things happen. Either, depending upon the user they've compromised, the hacker will sit and watch the mailbox for a period of time, could be a week, could be 2 weeks, and watch the transactions, and I'll explain to you one of the threats or one of the exploits that happen. Or what they'll start to do is download email from your deleted items, sent items, inbox, contacts, and calendars. They'll get all that information, so then they can craft additional attacks from your account, right? In this particular case, the attacker went to retrieve information from the outbox or the sent items. This particular company uses email to send contracts back and forth between consumers and businesses. They encrypt it in transit as they're required to do so under Massachusetts regulation. The problem is the data sitting at rest could be harvested. So the end result here is this particular company potentially lost personal information, could have impacted them greatly. It did not. Lost personal information, and in another particular case, the attacker watched the mailbox 30 days, realized that they had actually compromised a mailbox of the person sending out invoices. What they did was intercept the invoices at the end of the month, change the routing and bank numbers on the invoices, and then sent them out. What would happen is at that point, people would then change their automatic pay, and they've executed, and typically there'll be a 30-day follow-up there. So there is a window here, depending upon how you've configured your network, from immediate notification and block to a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day window. We'll talk a little bit more about that.
So Jeff, this obviously is a pretty sophisticated attack, and I think that's the important discussion here, is that these attacks are continually to evolve. I mean, this is what you've walked us through here. Obviously, is a fairly straightforward sample, but we've obviously know that there are more sophisticated examples. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the evolution of some of these attacks?
Yeah, and that's actually a very, very good question, Chandler. Attacks have become more sophisticated. Attacks have gone from an automated mass spamming process where we send out 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 piece of email, all the way down to a very targeted 1 or 2 or 3 type smaller focused, right? So, for example, we see more C-level attacks where, we see a company, a CFO, we see a crafted email impersonating the CEO asking for money transfers, right? That happens. That is a more one-on-one manual attack. And if you think about it, that requires that an attacker, really researches the victim and impersonates them. CEO or C-level attacks represent about $1.5 billion, a year in revenue as of last count. So it is definitely worth their effort. So we're seeing a lot of those happening, right? We're starting to see well-crafted websites. So for example, in the Apple case, a well-crafted website, meeting all those things we've told our end users to look out for, right? Hey, is it using HTTPS? Is it secure, right? Is it an actual website? Is the grammar correct? So those are improving. And the landscape is actually changing tremendously here. 5 years ago, an attack, be it a phishing attack or even a ransomware attack, and if we're not clear on what ransomware attacks are, this is when ultimately your files or services are held hostage, and to get them back, you need to pay a ransom. These are all individually crafted. Now, we can go on the web, we can buy pre-packaged ransomware called ransomware as a service and actually execute the ransomware. Ransomware in itself is one of the biggest growing cybercrime industries. They have help desk, tech support. They have a whole system in place to help you get your information back. We also talked a little bit about social hacking. This is a very interesting concept. And we did a webinar a few months back here at AIM, and we talked a little bit about social hacking. One of the challenges that we face is we as users are very straightforward in the information in which we provide. For example, when we do a password reset, they'll ask for our mother's maiden name, and indeed, we provide our mother's maiden name. Or they'll ask for what high school you went, or where you grew up, or even your first car. All of that information, if you answer it accurately, and I'm focusing on you as an attack, is publicly available. So those safety security questions that you answer are publicly available in many, many ways, right? City halls now are online, right? Newspapers are online and searchable. So one of the recommendations here is that when they ask for a mother's maiden name, you make up some information. You don't actually provide the true information. When they ask you, where you grew up, you make up information. You need to recall this, but you can be consistent. This takes away a lot of that social piece. So there's a bit of advice there as well. So
Great to hear, Jeff.
Yep. Thank you.
So I wanted to kind of bring it into the reality of data breaches. This number, when I first saw this, was pretty startling to me, but talk to us a little bit about what we've seen just in this year.
So first 2 quarters of this year, nearly 2 billion records have been compromised. We talked earlier about Yahoo acknowledging 3 billion records. Nearly 2 billion records in the first 6 months. Let's actually bring it around to September. In September alone, we know that Whole Foods, a part of Whole Foods, not Whole Foods in general, on September 29th reported that they've had loss of, we're going to call it personal identifiable information, right? They had a data breach. Deloitte in London had a data breach. Equifax, 144 million records, one of the most, not the largest data breach, but from a informational data breach, the worst data breach that has ever actually taken place. Sonic, drive-through, had a data breach as well. And that's just in September, and those are only 4 out of maybe 4 dozen companies that reported data breach globally. If you think about this and put it in perspective, nearly 2 billion records, really what does that mean? So 122 records every second, nearly 7,300 every minute, nearly 440,000 every hour, and so on. Now, of all these data breaches, less than 5% were secure data breaches, meaning that the information they took was encrypted and was useless. So 95% of the data breaches actually resulted in useful information. And when we talk about these data breaches, what are they taking? What are they trying to get from you, right? 74 to 80%, and now numbers will vary depending upon who publishes these numbers. You know, Gartner published the numbers, Forrester published numbers, a lot of them do, but consistently, 74 to 80% is all around theft of identity, and that is credentials and information. 13% of these data breaches really have financial access. As you can see, account access is 6%, and so on. Now, where are these data breaches coming from? Roughly, again, 74 to 78% are malicious outside actors. Right? So they're not internal, they're outside. They're people breaking into your network, be it on the cloud or on-prem, over the internet. This is your biggest single threat, right? Accidental loss of data, that's pretty straightforward. I accidentally sent W-2s out to the wrong person, or I can't find the records any longer, right? Malicious inside, a relatively small percent. This can be anything from, I'm leaving an organization and I want to take the client list, or I want to take information with me, or I've been dismissed from an organization, or I've left an organization, and I actually have company property. I have a laptop that I haven't returned, or I have some USB drives, whatever the case may be. State-sponsored is self-explanatory, governmental agencies attacking, and then incidences that are just unknown. So really the two numbers to look at here when we talk about protecting data and when we talk about protecting individuals is identity theft and malicious outsider. These are the things that we are going to talk about, and we're going to talk about how we can overcome these.
But this also happens at a local level as well. I think sometimes we in the industry just think, well, it's another company or another place that's not in my state. But we actually have examples where there have been local data breaches as well.
Yeah. So data breaches, and Massachusetts, by the way, has something very unique about it, and we'll talk about that in a moment, where some other states do not. But data breaches happen globally. We hear the big numbers, right? We hear about the Equifaxes of the world, or we hear about the Yahoos, or the National Health System. We hear about these very large numbers, these high profile. But keep in mind, it's not just these larger companies. It is smaller organizations. MGH hacked 4,300 patient records, right? They have an obligation to report. Boston Public School System, 19 employees fall victim to phishing scam. Now, this is very interesting because this phishing scam, published on June 30th of 2017, we don't talk about what happened after the fact. So when you see 19 Boston school employees fall victim, all right, a little news article on Fox 25, we'll go past it. But earlier, I showed you what happens with a phishing attack, what it can lead up to. So these are some local data breaches that have happened here. Now, in Massachusetts, we have a requirement to actually disclose data breaches. As a matter of fact, Massachusetts was one of the first states back in 2010 that actually worked on a data breach personal information policy and regulation for the state, AIM, worked with businesses to actually help move that forward, and was instrumental. So in Massachusetts, you can go out to, I've given a link here, out to www.bit.ly/MA-breaches, and this will show you all the breach notification reports. And it is about 30 pages, and I've only pulled 2017. It goes back many years. These are companies that either do one of two things: operate within the state of Massachusetts that has personal identifiable information, and or businesses outside of the state of Massachusetts that has information about residents of Massachusetts. And it's very interesting if you go out and take a look at, on this particular list, we have the University of Idaho, right? We have, St. Mary's Credit Union, all public information, all out there. So again, this is what Massachusetts has, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what some of the requirements here are. Excuse me.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. I think, you've actually done a really great job of painting the picture. The attacks are becoming more sophisticated. The impact obviously is very real. One of the things I think we wanted to share with the audience today as well is, what's at stake when there are security issues? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. Again, it will vary from company to company, but what is at stake. But at its highest, downtime, damages. So if you're a victim of a social attack, a ransomware, a phishing attack, any one of these things, it can impact your business by bringing your business offline. So for example, a ransomware attack, not getting access to your files, compromised emails, emails being inaccessible. Right? So those are some of what's at stake from a business perspective, right? You now need to remediate. You need to actually fix these problems. And fixing these problems are not only a technical issue where your IT department, your IT vendor needs to get involved and spend hours and hours and hours, but it also becomes a PR problem for the company. It becomes a legal problem in some cases, a notification problem. So there is being a victim of a ransomware attack or any sort of crime, not only the downtime, there's a remediation, there's a reputation of the organization at risk as well. So think about this, and I hate to use this as an example. However, Equifax, one, their stock dropped from a high of about $149 down to a low of about $89 in the course of a month or so. Who wants to do business with them? Do you think that the Macy's of the world, the Home Depot, whoever does credit, is really going to go to them, or are they going to go to TransUnion or one of these other credit reporting agencies? So there's a loss of reputation in business there. There is from a consumer perspective, do I actually want to go there and start using those services? So now think about in your business what that reputation will look like if you were a victim of attack and lost information. And by the way, this is just not information about Jeff Laurie and Jeff Laurie's social security number and where he lives and his dog's name. Think about this. If you're in manufacturing and you have a regulatory requirement to report information, be it materials being used, services being provided, and that information is lost, that also goes to your reputation. So it's not necessarily just personal information, it's business information as well. Obviously, business is disrupted, right? Data is lost, legal costs. I'll give you a small to medium business case where they had a phishing attack that they had to report. Their legal fees are now well over $250,000 alone, because in most cases, most organizations, even though they may have a legal department or they may have folks that are on staff or on retainer, when you start talking about cyber breaches, data loss, you really need to go to an attorney or a law firm that specializes in that. Public relations, we talked a little bit about that. What public relation nightmare are folks at Equifax facing? What's happening over at Sonic? What's happening with Whole Foods? And lastly, regulatory fines. So depending upon where you are, depending upon, what jurisdiction you're in, you can have fines that range anywhere from $5,000 to $2-3 million. And if we look at the news today, we know that there are 2 high-profile data breaches where there are class action suits against those organizations because they were entrusted with maintaining this information. Go ahead, sorry.
I was going to say, Jeff, no, I think regulatory fines, that's a nice segue into kind of some of the things that are being done at the state level around this issue.
Absolutely. So back in 2010, Massachusetts was one of the first states to enact a Personal Protection Information Reporting Act. both from a civil section and a criminal section. In this particular case, I'm going to refer to Massachusetts Code of Regulations, 201 CMR 17, and I've broken out a very small section of it, which is actually 17.04. And there are 4 things in this regulation that I find very, very interesting, and by the way, has become the model across the country. First one is control of data security passwords to ensure such passwords are kept in location and/or format that does not compromise the security of the data they protect. So what that basically means is, for example, your end users should be the only one that knows their username and password, that they shouldn't put it on a piece of paper, they shouldn't put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and that you have a duty to protect that beyond just holding that information. The second one here, which is very interesting, is reasonably monitoring of systems for unauthorized use or access. So I'm actually going to skip here 1 second and pause. In Yahoo's case, it took them multiple years to identify a problem and report. In Equifax's case, it took them at least 2 months to identify and report. So do you have controls today in place to know if you have been breached? So let's think about this. If you have an on-premise mail system, let's call it Exchange, doesn't carry-out, doesn't really matter, and a user's name and password has been compromised, and a villain is sitting there monitoring your email, how do you know that? What are the signs? How are you going to know that there's been a compromise? On average, and this is on the next slide, but I'm going to move it ahead, on average, 147 days before someone's detected. So here in Massachusetts, what is a reasonable monitoring system? Well, as technology moves, reasonable moves, right? We have the ability today to monitor your on-prem mail system or Active Directory or GroupWise, whatever you're using, or in the cloud for suspicious activity. So now that level of reasonable has moved. It moves every single year as technology evolves, right, and transforms. This one is very interesting as well. Reasonably up-to-date versions of system security agent software, which includes malware protection, viruses, and patches. So let's roll back to March. In March, there was a big thing, about WannaCry, right? March, April, May, June, all of these threats. 90% of the threats that companies face are because of vulnerabilities in software. When companies do not patch in a timely fashion, generally within a month, within a couple of weeks, they expose themselves. It is amazing that in March of this year, 2017, there was a public announcement of basically WannaCry and some of its processes and problems. And then 2 months later, it got exploited. Folks had a 2-month window in which to take care of a problem that was identified, and they did not. So here in Massachusetts, one of the elements of the protection of information says, hey, you should be doing this. So think of Equifax. They were breached because unpatched systems, right? So now, what does that mean? Well, we can patch systems, we can have something in control, we can automate, but we just have to execute on it. And lastly, security training. Many companies do not execute in security training, or they send an email out. Proactive security training is key and required. Excuse me. So as we move on.
So Jeff, I think obviously there's we've covered the wide range of conversations and issues around security overall, and obviously the regulatory, the disruption to business, the hit to reputation. Let's kind of shift our attention now and talk a little bit about how an organization can address what does technology bring in? How can we use modern technology to really counter these attacks?
Sure, and that is a great question. So everyday technology evolves, services become available. One of the services is a product and offering called Enterprise Mobility Suite, Enterprise Mobility Plus Security. It's an offering by Microsoft, and I'm just highlighting this particular offering. And what it does is it looks at all of the possible areas in which you can be exploited, and it offers services to protect the identity and asset management. So let's talk about this. Users and their identity is ultimately the gateway to a data breach. So protecting them, understanding their behavior, knowing what is going on is key to any sort of security policy and process. Then we talk a little about protecting the information. In Massachusetts, the code that I just referenced has a section that talks about identifying confidential information and separating it. So we need to protect our information. Earlier in this presentation, we noted that 5% of less of the data being stolen was encrypted. So protecting information is key. Security management, get a security process in place, right? Security management is looking at the confidentiality of the information, the integrity information, the accessibility information, and the identity of the users. Then let's look beyond what we're doing today, right? Today we're using antivirus. We went out and we bought, Kaspersky, or we bought McAfee, or all this, and that's fine. I got antivirus, I'm covered. Well, antivirus is only one piece of a larger process. Think about advanced threat protection and what that means and how you can leverage it to strengthen your security posture. So technology is evolving. We are becoming consumers of information on any sort of device, be it a computer, a laptop, a kiosk, right? We're evolving. Our workforce is becoming mobile, right? We now have workforces that work anytime, anywhere, 24 hours a day. They need access to information. So what we want to be able to do is provide a system where employees in the workforce can thrive, but also in a secure environment. One of the challenges that a lot of firms face is something called shadow IT. And shadow IT at a high level is when users, they want to be able to collaborate. They want to be able to get access to information, at 3 in the morning. And what they'll do is they'll come in and they'll install a cloud service, say Box, for example, and they'll take those documents they want to work on. It could be a financial spreadsheet. It could be something from marketing. It could be something from HR. They'll drop it in the Box. They'll go home. They'll work on it, and they'll come back to the office. They don't mean harm. That is not their intent. They're trying to work. But the fact is, they are creating a shadow IT environment that becomes very difficult to maintain. So a couple of things here that is very, very important. One is controlling the identity and access to the cloud, right? We want to make sure that, our users, we know what they're doing, how they're doing it. They have an easy way to log on and to authenticate, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and that we understand what they're using. So there are tools, for example, multi-factor authentication. Any user that is accessing information from outside the organization should be using multi-factor authentication. Earlier in the presentation, we talked about that 5% of the information that was encrypted that was useless. If we turn on MFA, multi-factor authentication, the username and password itself becomes useless. Multi-factor authentication is the single best way to protect against a data breach externally, right, when you have externally facing resources, right? Now, so we obviously want to monitor and keep our identity and control that. We want to talk about, what is going on in our environment. We want insight into our environment, right? We want to look at, what our users are doing, what they're, what services they're using, and how they're using it. We want to protect, We also want to protect the assets, right? We want to protect mobile devices. We want our mobile devices to be controlled. Earlier I said, you know, that laptop, when a person was discharged from a company, we don't get back. We want to be able to wipe that. We want to make sure our users are only using authorized applications. Our data. So we talked about a data breach with email. We want to make sure that if someone downloads that email is encrypted. It is useless, encryption at rest, that our data has digital rights on it. And virtualization of desktops. This is something that's very interesting, and I had a conversation in Philadelphia a few months back, actually about a year ago, doing a similar presentation, and a company came in and they said, you know, we're 100% secure. We don't give folks access to data. We don't do this. We had a conversation back and forth. And at the end of the conversation, they had implemented virtual desktops. And for them, no content was held on any machine. People had access from outside. They used multi-factor authentication. From an IT perspective, they needed to maintain one image. And it gave IT a greater control of their data and a greater control of the desktop experience.
Jeff, it's Chris, and I think you're kind of answering this question as you go along, but we do have a question from one of our participants, and the question is, what kind of software is available that would, in fact, satisfy the definition of a reasonable monitoring system for security breaches?
That is a great question. So there's a three-part answer to this. So currently today, you look at your landscape, look at your users. For example, if you're in a Windows environment, well, I'm going to make an assumption. If you're in a Windows environment using Active Directory, there are a couple of different pieces of software. Microsoft, part of the EMS suite, offers Advanced Threat Analytics, which is ultimately a server that you can install on-prem that watches Active Directory and watches for abnormalities. That's one piece. If you're in the cloud, similarly, there is Active Directory Identity Services that will watch your users, that will really look at their behavior. So I'll give you a perfect example. In the example I showed on the first couple of screens, we had a hack that took place outside of the United States. This particular company is in Pittsfield, so when they logged in, users log in Pittsfield typically and or the surrounding areas. In this particular case, someone logged in from outside the country, an alert was thrown. Within 5 minutes, an email was sent, the user outside the country was contained, and you got notification. So it depends upon how your environment is set up. However, again, there are products from Microsoft, there are products across the board that are available, and these products don't cost a whole lot of money or a whole lot of technology to implement. They just need to be implemented.
Jeff, I have one other question from our audience members. I would like to be able to sometimes choose a more secure email to send certain items. What do you recommend?
So that will depend upon your environment itself. Typically, what you'll use is a third-party service. So if you have a mail system on-prem, you're going to use a third-party service like a Mimecast or a Symantec or a Zix, and they will encrypt the email in transit. Right, that is the easiest. So when it leaves your email system, it gets encrypted to the next email system. If you're using Office 365, you can leverage some of the tools that are built in Office 365, depending upon the version you're using, for secure email. But, if you're also using, let's say, Gmail or anything from Azure, AWS, they have their similar products. So it depends upon your configuration. If you have an on-prem server, you're going to use a third-party service like a Mimecast, for example, where they will do the encryption for you. You hit a button, you put a keyword in, and it encrypts it. This also goes on handhelds. If you're on your mobile phone, you can do the same exact thing. If you're in the cloud, for example, if you're on the Microsoft platform and Office 365, there are services there available for encryption. And if you're using other service providers, there's like services.
Good. Thanks, Jeff.
Yep. No, I hope I answered those.
So Jeff, just to kind of click down on each of those concepts, and I think we want to just, kind of highlight each one of these stage by stage. So obviously the identity and access management, you mentioned, it's all about, kind of that saying, make sure you lock the front door. Make sure that you've got the safeguard and the resources, and effectively making sure that conditional access rules are in place. What other tidbits of advice would you have around identity and access management?
Sure. Let me give you a real great example here. And, a lot of times when we talk about technology security, sometimes we throw out these terms and phrases not everyone is aware of, right? So I do think, obviously, locking the front door is important. And let me give you some perspective. Let's walk over to Apple and buy a brand new iPhone 8, right, and turn it on. And the first thing it'll ask you for, do you want to set up mail? And what you'll do is you'll put in your email address, your corporate email address, jlar@icor.com. You'll put your password in, and within a minute or two, you now have corporate email on your phone. That happens time and time again. And the problem with that is you have now a device in your network that has access to corporate information that, one, you're not aware of, right? So, preventing that from happening, giving conditional access, meaning when a person goes to do this, it's put in a container, they don't have access, and you're given notice as an administrator that someone's tried to do this. But this is not just limited to, mobile devices. Computers are the same. So being able to isolate computers and services before they get on the network so you can authorize them is very, very important. You want to be able to validate the person who is actually using the service. So let me now bring this around a little bit more. Think about this. Facebook, perfect example, has two-factor authentication. If you turn on two-factor authentication before you get to Facebook, you have to put in a secondary credentials. You have to approve stuff. And if you use Facebook or any of those social services, if someone tries logging in from an unknown location or unknown device, you'll get an email. So that's really is protecting the identity, protecting the assets.
And then as far as, beyond the device management or physical device, there's actually the information itself and some steps that can be taken to really make sure that, the information is protected based on sensitivity.
Yeah, so a couple of things. You have really two routes here. You can isolate and separate information, critical, confidential information against public information, right? And you can treat that. That's one way of doing it. That has a very high overhead. Or what you do is you treat all information as sensitive and put those controls in. And I would recommend treating all information as sensitive, because when you separate what is sensitive and what isn't sensitive, there will be a gap there. There will be something that slips through the cracks. So treating all your information as sensitive information, I think, is key. And being able to understand who's accessing information, what they're doing with the information, and getting insight. So do you know today, for example, if you have an employee and they go and download gigabytes of information, do you know that's actually happening? Most cases, most organizations don't know that. But there are systems that allow you to get that insight. So think about whatever industry you're in. Let's say you're in legal and you're a law firm. It's very unusual that an employee would download 100 client files, right? You kind of want to know that. That is suspect, right? So you want to protect the information. You want to be able to get insight into the information. And classifying all information as sensitive is the easiest way to do it. Start looking at access rules and who's using what, getting insight into that, right, is going to be key.
And then as far as the device and security management side, we've talked about it, you've touched upon it briefly, but there's actually kind of another aspect to this, which is the patch management side, which we know, has been responsible for a few high-profile breaches as of late. Talk to us a little bit about what are some thinking and approaches around device and security management.
Sure. So this, by the way, is applicable to folks that are on-prem, folks that are mobile, and people who have services in the cloud. Now, when we talk about services in the cloud, there are two types of services. There are basically SaaS services. So there are the Salesforce of the world, which is a SaaS-based service, where they're responsible for patching and maintaining their systems. However, and there is a however there. Then there's infrastructure as a service, for example, AWS and Azure, where you put a server in the cloud. Well, you're responsible for that. Just as you're responsible for patching and maintaining on-premise equipment, you're responsible for maintaining and patching servers that are in the cloud, and you're also responsible for those endpoints. And those endpoints may be a laptop, a mobile device, an iPad. So it is very, very important that you come up with a streamlined process, most cases automated, that will automatically patch those assets that you have. I'm going to divert right here for 1 second. One of the biggest threats today against mass attacks are these things called IoT devices. So the refrigerator that connects to the internet, your TV that connects to the internet, all of these devices generally go unpatched and are vulnerable to attack. Let's not make sure that our corporate equipment does not fall into that. So automating system by using patch management programs like Microsoft Intune, where you can push out patches to either mobile devices, to workstations, that you actually get a record of what's happening is key. And the other part too here is the ability to manage the applications. If you're giving an employee a laptop, frankly, there should be, or even a workstation, there should be some strings attached. And some of those strings attached are to ensure that we're running only authorized applications, that we have insight into what is running on the machines. And by the way, I can't install anything. 60% of small to medium businesses, the end user is an administrator of the machine in which they're using. That needs to change as well. Excuse me.
So just to kind of round out the conversation, and you mentioned advanced threat protection previously in the presentation. What are some things that we know industry leaders like Microsoft are doing around this space?
So 146 days, medium number of an attacker is in a system before they're actually recognized and detected. 147 days is the average. There are 2 years, 3 years, 6 months. Being able to get insight into your organization is going to drop that number tremendously. Get that number down to 10 minutes. If you have a breach, you want to know 10 minutes, 5 minutes. The sooner you know the breach, the quicker you can react, the quicker you can minimize the threat and disruption. Microsoft has tools that are designed specifically, one of which is something called Advanced Threat Protection. It is part of the Windows 10 Enterprise feature set. What it does is it looks at the machine, looks at the user behavior, looks at traffic coming in and out of the machine, and looks for threats. Unlike antivirus software, who is designed to block a threat, right? This one is designed to not only block, but to analyze a threat. This tool gives you insight into what is going on with every single machine. You can theoretically have a machine that has been infected for months, that is sending information out, that is on your network, that may be spreading information. Let's figure out what's abnormal. So advanced threat protection baselines the system and lets you know that there's some specific, some very strange behavior going on. All of the signatures and information come from Microsoft, and over 200 of their partners, submit information and trends. So if you give this some thought, the Microsofts of the world who handle 75% of the email traffic, who has a high number of internet, intercepts, they are probably the best people to come back and give you some analytics on what's going on with your equipment. This help protects against zero-day threats, gives you insight, lets you actually track a breach all the way down to what it's done and what it's taken, if anything at all.
And then just kind of talking through the worst case scenario around recovery and business continuity. What are some things that you've had conversations around with customers in terms of the recovery of a breach or recovery of a security incident?
Every IT department should look at a couple of different layers when they look at IT security. One is how to prevent data loss, how to prevent data breaches. That is very, very important. You have to have a program in place that addresses that. What is equally important is if it happens, what do we do? How do we react? If you do not have a recovery solution in place, a business continuity solution in place, statistically, 6 out of 10 businesses go out of business within a year, right? Because they don't have the ability to recover properly and in a timely fashion. So think about your recovery plan. RTO, recovery time objective. How long can you afford to be down? How long can you afford not to have access to your data? Is it a day? Is it an hour? Is it 3 days? You need to sit down and figure out if your IT systems will go away today, how long and could you operate without them? And then the recovery point objective is, okay, we've had an incident, and at what point do I need to recover? Simple way to explain this is most organizations will do backups nightly. So there is 8 to 12 hours worth of work that happens on Monday. Monday night, I back up my data. And then Tuesday, I kind of go along. And Tuesday at 5 o'clock, I have a failure in which I need to restore. Well, all the transactions, all the work that was done on Tuesday will not be recoverable. We can only go back to the last backup, which happened to be Monday night. So you need to think about how long can I be down, recovery time objective, and at what point do I need to get my data back, recovery point objective. You can utilize, today, there are so many services available to you to ensure that your recovery point objective and your recovery time objective are as small as can be. So think about hybrid backups. If you're on-premise, you back up information on-prem, you move it to the cloud, and if you have a failure on-prem, you fail over to the cloud. If you are in the cloud, you have options to also do hybrid backups. They can be anywhere from, if you're in Cloud A, for example, Azure, you can replicate to an AWS. You can replicate to a private data center. So redundancy, hybrid backups are going to be critical. In addition to which, when we start talking about business continuity and business resumption and these type plannings, don't limit this just to how I get my IT services back up and running. Think about what I need to do. If I have a data breach, what are the 5 things I need to do? I need to restore my data. I need to make notification. I need to call the folks in marketing. I need to call the folks in PR. I need to get a hold of my lawyer. I need to know what to do. So when an event happens, everyone runs around. You need a roadmap of how to return the event, or how to work through the event, I'm sorry.
So the cost is probably something that some folks on the call or on the webinar are probably wanting to understand, the cost of the protection versus the reaction or the, addressing an incident. Tell us a little bit about, you mentioned before, on average, it takes about 46 days to resolve a cyber attack, which has an average cost of around $21,000 per day, or a total cost of just under $1 million. And for a small, medium business, the data breach is now around $117,000 per incident. But on the right-hand side, you can see that, we have a range of pricing around the EMS suite. And, depending on the size of a small, medium business, the prices can range. But if you look at the cost of the protection versus the cost of an incident, clearly there's a huge value in having that type of protection to make sure that things can move forward and not having issues, with the cyber attack cost. Anything you want to add to that, Jeff, in terms of the way we think about this cost of protection versus reaction?
Yeah, a couple quick things as we're coming up to the hour. I want to make sure I get through the other slides and take a couple more questions and answers. But it is ultimately more cost effective to protect the assets and the individual than to run into a cyber event. And these numbers really speak for themselves. In a 50-firm company, we're talking somewhere between $8,000 and $10,000 a year to protect versus anywhere from $21,000 to $117,000 a year to recover. So I do think this is critical. So a lot of times the barrier to good security is budget, but if you really look at the result of what happens if I don't protect against the cost, it is pretty straightforward. The other key here is, as we kind of move on, the other key here is please think about this. Educating employees ongoing is key. Technically, as technical people, we can only do so much. We need to actually educate our employees, and I would strongly recommend a security program, but a modernized security program. The best way to do this is to make the security program fun. Let's not watch a video and check a box. Let's engage folks in marketing who can make it social, who can really market internally to make it people want to read it, to participate. You know, that is going to be key. You have to get interactivity from your employees. You got to be interactive. The culture is changing. You know, as an IT person, I sit someone in front of a computer, I have them watch a video, take a test, check a box, and I'm done. That is not effective. Get folks in marketing, get it engaged, make it social. A couple of key takeaways here that you should be really aware about is that there is affordable technology that can help you protect your organization. You really want to work with a provider who understands what that technology is and how to protect your organization and can make a business justification for it. Be prepared to recover. You know, attacks will happen. Be prepared to recover. That is your last line of defense. And the quicker you can recover, the more systematic you can do, the more prepared you are, the greater chances is business will survive and opportunities will flow. The last part here is definitely educate employees and train. Lastly, a little bit about ICOR. Just so you're aware, we've been here around 20 years, outsourced across the country. We are the IT provider here with AIM. 90% of our clients we've had from day one for the last 21 years. We're headquartered over in the Straff Center. We have been Microsoft Northeast Partner of the Year. We've been Cloud Partner of the Year. And we've been voted some accolades from CRN and some top IT consulting firms here in Massachusetts. Do we have any questions beyond what has been asked that I can answer?
Jeff, very quickly, we have a question, which I think goes back to the Massachusetts regulations that you talked about. Are all companies required to report a data breach publicly? I mean, obviously, you have to tell your vendors and people like that, but does everybody have to report if they have a breach?
So I'm going to give you two answers. The first answer is always check with your compliance and legal team. That is ultimately their call. In Massachusetts and actually across the country, if you have a data breach that involves basically personal identifiable information, dates of birth, social security numbers, name, address, bank account numbers, there is a high likelihood you are required by law and statute to report that data breach. So the answer to that would be yes, you do have an obligation to report the data breach if it involves personal identifiable information. Again, things like hospital records, social security numbers, bank account numbers, things of that nature. The best person in your organization to answer that will be a compliance officer. I would say yes, and if you want more information, shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to follow up and give you some resources. Now, if you have a data breach of benign information, you know, someone, you know, grabbed a couple of PowerPoints and there was nothing there, then you don't have an obligation. But again, I would sit and talk to our compliance officer in your organization. But as a rule of thumb, personal identifiable information, yes. Benign information, no. But again, you know, check with legal on that.
And a final question, Jeff. One of our participants asked, do you have a handout for basic security training?
So I can provide you with some. So the answer is yes. Again, follow up on the next screen. A couple of things here. By the way, on the screen, there are some links here. For example, this month is Cybersecurity Awareness. So there's a great link here, and we'll make sure you get these links. We've provided some data security questions. There's some webinars that are available on cyber attacks. I'm more than happy to provide you with some information. On the next screen here, you'll see is my contact information as well as Chandler's. We'll be happy to follow up and give you kind of a quick handout sheet. Not a problem.
Excellent. So again, once again, everyone who's been on the call, thank you very much. We will send you the slide deck, so you'll have all this contact information. We'll send you the recording. So again, please share that with other people. We really do encourage you to join us next week, which is the final part of our 4-part series. It's called Enabling a Mobile Workforce. And if you're like we are here at AIM, everybody is mobile. So once again, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you to Jeff, thank you to Chandler, and have a great day.